All right, what's up, guys? Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark, live again, Gamecock Central, GC Live, talking Gamecock football. And again, we've continued to do these. Really, they've almost become daily because there's actually football to talk about. So glad to be back on. And today, of course, probably we'll talk quite a bit about Will Muschamp's press conference and about, the players speaking today as well. So everybody go ahead and get in line. I see some people rolling in right now. We are live on YouTube, Facebook, and on Twitter. And just excited again to get back on here and have some stuff to actually talk about. And should have plenty of content on GamecockCentral.com as well as we sort of break down everything that we heard today. Will Muschamp talking for about 30 minutes. Several players, Jamie Robinson, Zach Pickens, among the guys that spoke today, JJ Nigbare. So I thought, Chris, there were some things to sort of glean from what we heard, but we'll start with Will Muschamp. What was your maybe just first takeaway or biggest takeaway from what we just heard about an hour ago from Will Muschamp?
Well, here's one for me, and it may not be one that strikes everybody, but we've talked about it a good bit lately, and that is I'm always intrigued to hear sort of the first guys out of Muschamp's mouth when he's talking about a certain position. And so Zach Pickens mentioned it today. Muschamp mentioned it at his last press conference, and then he mentioned it again today talking about Jabari Ellis, defensive tackle. I think when you lose Javon Kinlaw, obviously the natural question is who can step up? We know that nobody's going to be Javon Kinlaw, but who can step up? Will it be a collective effort? Will it be an individual? And so most fans, for good reason, had sort of ticketed or put that label on a Zach Pickens or Rick Sandage, and certainly those guys have a chance to step forward and play a lot. But instead, it's been the veterans, who have been running first team a lot, who have been playing a lot, and who've been drawing the most accolades during preseason camp. And I don't suppose we should be all that surprised. Muschamp really made a point to say, look, Jabari Ellis played a lot towards the end of last year. You mentioned last time Wesley started the Clemson game, and he played well. And so it seemed like Muschamp's not really surprised by this. The guy's come a long way. We talked about Ellis's progression on our last GC Live show, but that stood out to me. That's, I think, a smaller note. Secondly, I would say, and maybe I should have even mentioned this first because it has to do with quarterbacks, and everybody loves to talk about quarterbacks. He talked a lot about Colin Hill. Part of that was because he'd been asked. He was asked more than one question about Colin Hill, but he said a lot of things, even though he said, hey, the quarterback battle is not settled. We might know more after Saturday's scrimmage. He talked a lot about Colin. I think he even used the term that, the verbiage that since he came here with experience in the offense on the field, that sort of gives him a leg up. I think he used that exact term. So I thought I know you said one, but those are probably my two biggest takeaways from today's press conference.
And I'll go to, and I guess we'll circle back and sort of maybe go a little more in depth on those two things, but I'll go to actually Muschamp talking before the presser. He was on with Jamie Bradford and those guys on JB and Goldwater's show, and apparently said if the season started today, that Eric Douglas will be the starting center. I know that's somebody, we've mentioned on Gamecock Central previously going into the offseason, Chris, that would probably have the edge at that position, at least at the time, from what we were being told, very reliably. But to sort of hear that is still the case, I thought was an interesting note today, and continues to be one of those positions. I think there are several positions that are still in contention where guys are fighting it out, and center definitely one of those. Hank Mano's still in that conversation. Vinny Murphy, who's worked at center and guard, is in the conversation. We'll see if Javon Gwynn ends up in the conversation or not. Now, Muschamp did have, when he talked to the media on the Zoom call, he didn't even mention Eric Douglas when he was saying he mentioned a couple of guys, or really a handful of guys, that he said, I need a little more consistency out of these guys. So I thought that was a specific message. Sometimes coaches do sort of use the media, I think, to drive home a point. And to me, that stood out immediately as like, okay, Muschamp wants these guys to know he's not playing around, that he needs a little more consistency. And we've talked about the offensive line, Chris, being a potential strength of this team. I still think it can be, but here we are early in camp, and Muschamp saying, hey, I need a little more.
I was a little surprised he made that comment, and I think you're exactly right. Not that he was just saying it to conjure it out of thin air only for motivation. I mean, obviously, especially when you play in the SEC, you're probably never going to look like a dominant offensive line. You know, we get that question sometimes. When's South Carolina's offensive line going to be dominant? My answer is always never. You know, like, it doesn't matter. You're not going to be dominant in the SEC for the most part. You can be really good at times, but you're going to play against many, many talented teams with many, many talented players. And so you're going to have trouble. You're not going to be able to block guys all the time. So your O-line, your running backs, they all have to work in concert. But getting back to the point, you know, he did mention those guys. I think it was Jackson Turnetine, Ja'Kai Moore, Jalen Nichols, and there was one other one.
I don't remember what other guy.
It was Javon Glenn. It was Javon Glenn. It was those four guys, I believe, that he mentioned. And so I thought that was an interesting combo of guys that he mentioned. And I thought it was, you know, it did take me aback a little bit that he even said that. But I'm sure there was a reason for it. Number one, obviously there's things you got to clean up in any position group in the preseason. And number two, maybe a little motivation just to sort of increase the competition level there. But I think there's a lot of people sort of question about when a coach says that the offensive line is the strength of the team or the strength of the offense. And I think when you look at this team, when you look at offensively, you know, it's the position that has the most experience, right? Sort of that metric when you take talent plus experience. I think that's the group with the least questions. Not to say it's perfect, not to say it's going to be dominant. Obviously, South Carolina has some questions at running back still, especially Marshawn Lloyd out. That plays a big part in your O-line as well. But it is the position that probably has the least question marks and probably that we know most about at this point.
Yeah, so I thought one other, and we really want to talk. We talked about COVID all off season, so we want to talk more football. But I did think it's worth mentioning. It's noteworthy. You know, previously when Muschamp had spoken to the media, they were awaiting the results to that COVID test where they all took when preseason camp started. He said of the 300, this isn't just the 85 on Scully, then walk-ons. This is everybody in the building gets tested when they test. And, you know, so he said out of the 300 tests, one positive, which essentially, if you do the math, is a percent positive of 0.3 repeating. So not 3%, 0.3%, a third of a percentage point, basically. So if you're talking about comparing that, Chris, to the outward world and everything else, I mean, South Carolina, I think percentage the last maybe couple of weeks has gone back and forth between maybe 12%, 11%, I think at its lowest, up to 17, 18% just in the general population in the Palmetto State. So I thought that was a good sign that they have continued to keep those numbers low. You know, moving forward, they'll get back. You know, they tested again today, the entire building. They'll get back a result probably tonight, early tomorrow, something like that. So you certainly, they talked about it. Is it a true bubble? You know, probably not, but they are taking that bubble mindset. We've seen it work for the NBA. They can't obviously lock down college kids like the NBA has with their players, but I think we're seeing that it is working at South Carolina. And you heard, I mean, Jamie Robinson came in with his mask on for his Zoom media thing, and then Cam Smith did the same. So the guys, I think, have bought into this idea of what it means to sort of live boring lives, as Muschamp keeps saying. So we don't have to go all into that, but I think worth pointing out. So, Chris, I will say something I do want to go into. And by the way, hey, Miss Sandage, I see she's on here. That's Rick's mom, junior defensive tackle. This Saturday, I think now we're what, a month away from the season, right at a month. So there is still time. But if you want to talk about, if you're in one of those position battles a chance to sort of set the pace, a chance to step up and maybe be the person that you say, all right, everybody else has got to beat me to be the starter at this position. It sounds like, Muschamp hinted at it or straight up said it a couple times. Saturday is going to be a big day, I think, for starting to actually shape up these depth charts. You can take a big lead maybe at a position, and the fact that they're going to essentially operate it like a football game for the most part. They'll be in their regular jerseys. Bobo will be in the booth calling plays. This is an operation scrimmage where you're trying to work on your operation, making sure you get the calls in the correct way, making sure you're just on the fly, stuff like that. In a regular practice, a coach can sort of stop play at any time and say, hey, hold up, my DBs are not lined up right. Hold up, this guy's not in the right spot. This is more like, hey, we're taking the training wheels off, go play, and let's see. So you want to talk about a step-by-step process, like we've talked about the pads going on earlier this week. That was a big step. I would say first scrimmage, that's when you start to maybe separate people and separate position battles.
Yeah, no doubt. It's huge. And so that's one of the things that Muschamp really talked about wanting to see is just how, like you said, Wes, how does the team operate? We can go into more specific things of, hey, who's going to, is anybody going to begin to separate in a certain position battle? Are there going to be any explosive plays? Are there going to be any big plays defensively, any turnovers? Those things are important in the scrimmage situation, but cart before the horse, you got to make sure that you're getting those calls in, that you're lined properly. You got to see all those things first as a coach. And if you got those things checked off, you feel better about where you're at. You can move on to those other things. If you don't, you feel a lot worse about you may say, hey, we got some issues here. So this offense, for example, is going to have enough questions in terms of how are they going to create explosive plays? How are some of these position battles going to shake out without having to worry about, are they getting calls in? Are they lining up correctly? So those things are really, really important. But secondary to that, and still very importantly, this is a time where maybe we start to get a little bit of a lean of, is anybody separating between Ryan Helinski and Colin Hill? Truly, they've been splitting between the ones. I highly doubt the coaches come out of Saturday saying, all right, this is probably our guy, one or the other. But there is going to be an opportunity for that. And remember, last preseason when Jake Bentley was the incumbent starter, and it was a battle between Dakarrion Joyner and Ryan Helinski for the backup job, Will Muschamp wanted to name a backup somewhere between, I think it was practice 10 and 15. He wanted to have sort of a decent idea, and I think he ended up doing it sometime in mid-August. And so obviously the timeline here is different, but the point is you want to be able to have some scrimmage situations, and this is the first real scrimmage situation of the preseason, to have some guys start to separate. This is as close as you're going to get to a game situation with everything that they're doing to simulate. So who performs the best? And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what we hear coming out of that.
Yeah, and I'm excited to get some of that, to start hearing some of that word, to get that news that we're looking for, and to be able to start to, turn around and report that to this fan base. I think that's an intriguing battle. We had a question on YouTube that works in with this, and he said, do you think Helinski's injuries will affect him at all mentally? I would say no. I don't think that's a big factor in this at all. He's 100%. He did get banged up last year, but it's good to go now as far as that goes. And let's see. I had another one. I lost my place. Where is it at? Somebody else was asking. Okay, same guy. Curse Sticks. Will Doty get redshirted, and how much do you think he will play? Red shirts are out the door at this point. There's really no such thing as a red shirt, right? It's unprecedented. There in 2020, nobody on the team will get quote redshirted, and the year will not count for anyone. If you're a senior, you're a senior next year. If you're a junior this year in 2020, you're still a junior. Next year in 2021. So red shirts are out the door. Now, Muschamp said Luke Doty was not going to redshirt anyway. They've always had plans for him. He was going to play. But the word redshirt, literally you can just delete it for 2020, much like other things in 2020. It does not exist. So that's an odd thing to say, but it's true. And I wanted to that leads me into something else I wanted to talk about that Muschamp mentioned. That's the 85. Roster management for a team right now could get very interesting. Now, Chris Muschamp, his thought process was maybe they do it like the spring sports, like they did in baseball, for example, where I think, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I think what he meant by this was that you'd have to be below an 85 for everybody else in your program, but your seniors who's, stuck around basically would not count towards the 85. Now he was saying that, now he was speculating. That's not set in stone, but that was his thought process of how he thought that might work.
Yeah, he did mention sort of that parallel of spring sports. Obviously, when spring sports championships got nixed by the NCAA, and then conferences ended up completely canceling spring sports, and then it was up to the NCAA. What are you going to do? You're going to restore a year of eligibility. So they ended up doing that, which football has moved towards now. And so then you got the question of, okay, well, what if you have, say you're going to graduate 20 seniors, what if they all want to come back? And then you're full and you can't even bring in any of your prospects from your recruiting class unless you do something. And so they've obviously done that. There was basically a scholarship limit increase for spring sports like baseball, for example. The thought is that that's what the NCAA do here. They'll have to, or it'll just create all sorts of chaos. The thing I'll be interested in, Wes, and I don't think this will be a problem at South Carolina, is that, and we've already seen some reporting and writing on this and some speculating, is will this be another financial burden on schools even, to bring back, instead of funding 80, 85 scholarships, 85 is obviously the limit. Some schools aren't all the way there. Are you having to fund 105, for example? And that can be an issue for schools who are going to be running extremely, extremely tight margins or operating in the red for quite a while now because of this pandemic. So, but yeah, that should all get sorted out and situated. It'll be interesting to see, and it all, Muschamp said this too, it depends. For a lot of guys, it depends on how they play. Some guys may come back regardless, like Parker White. He's a kicker. He may not be itching to move on from football or try to move towards a pro career. So he may just come back, or some guys may want to go, stay in school, and while they're doing it, play football. Some guys may play extremely well this year and decide they want to go off pro. They certainly have some guys like J.C. Horn, for example, who are probably going to be in that boat. So I think it just depends, but I'd expect that to get sorted out like they did with the spring sports.
Yeah, well, and even here's the interesting thing about that. You're basically, are you going to just say that's the case for 1 year, for next year? Or now over time it will sort of get sorted out, because not everybody's going to want to stay at a place for 6 years, in some cases, or if you're Adam Prentice, you could literally be a 7th year player.
Yeah.
Most people are going to say, hey, I want to move on. But, Adam Prentice is the type guy, plays fullback, and I've never met him. I'm not speaking for him. I'm just saying he plays a non sort of value position right now as far as the NFL goes. He's apparently a very good fullback, though. He's in an offense where the fullback is valued. If the dude loves football, he may literally just be like, man, I want to keep playing college ball, So now he's run out of classes to take already, I think. But, who knows what could happen. But here's the thing, dude. So it's not just the current seniors that are getting a free year. So let's say 2021, we're going to not count those seniors towards the 85, right? Well, let's fast forward to 2022. If your entire roster has still ballooned, like do the next seniors, like when they're seniors, do they count in 2022? Or by that point, what I'm saying, does everybody count to the 85? Eventually, you're going to have to cut into your recruiting classes, right? Now, if you maybe eased it back and said, we're going to give 2 years where seniors don't count, then maybe by then it's sort of naturally progressed back to a normal roster. type thing, and guys, but it's another odd situation to sort of have to sort through right now, I think, if you are a coaching staff. All right, let's hit a couple questions. We had a question about do we do radio in the morning? We do radio we don't have a set radio deal. We're on 107.5 quite a bit. Do some other shows, but we don't have a set radio show that we do in the morning. Somebody else wanted to talk about Luke Doty. Shane, I think Luke Doty has been really good in practice. Will Muschamp praised him today. And, Chris, I thought it was interesting. I'll let you talk a little more about it. He was like, first of all, and I said it earlier, Luke Doty ain't redshirting, even if there were red shirts this year, which there aren't. And he also said, hey, let our opponents think that if Doty's in the game, it's just for the Wildcat. Because he's like, this guy can throw the ball as well. I'll be curious to see sort of how it plays out. Shane, you asked, is he like a true wideout or more of like a slot H-back? From what I've heard, he's playing wide receiver, but he is playing in the slot is sort of where they've positioned him. But it also seems like more and more they've been so happy with him at quarterback, Chris. I think you're kind of in a position, as strange as this year is and is going to be, with the potential of COVID exposures decimating a position. I think it's also very important, and I think this was maybe the point Muschamp has gotten at and that Bobo talked about last week. It's very important to make sure that Luke Doty or Jay Urich are both ready, or at least one of them is really in a good spot, even behind, a Colin Hill and a Ryan Helinski.
Yeah, for sure. Luke can just do a lot of things for you, and they've been quick to praise him. Will Muschamp has, and Mike Bobo at multiple positions. And again, we go back to why he's playing some wide receiver. They looked on the roster, said, who are our most dynamic guys? Who are our best guys? And they felt like Luke Doty was one of those from an athletic standpoint. When you got a guy that can run 4.4 and he can throw the ball, and he's a great competitor and he's smart, then you may look at him at some different spots. He doesn't have the experience in terms of college ball that Colin Hill does, especially within this offense, or Ryan Helinski does, in terms of playing SEC competition, but he's got a lot of talent. And so, you can bring him along more slowly at quarterback, but, here's the thing, man. Do they give Luke Doty some time at quarterback in regular game situations? I think this has sort of become an interesting, fascinating question for me. Is it seems like he's on track to play some at wide receiver, right? But how much true quarterback does he play? And like Muschamp said, they're not going to put him out there just when he's in the game. If he does get in the game at quarterback for whatever reason, he's not just run a power play or something, or, run sort of a wildcat deal, counter, whatever it may be. He might go out there and throw the football, but does he get some time there regardless? It seems possible, and they have been happy with him there, but it seems like, man, that his greatest chance to make an impact just right now where we sit may be at receiver, just because it's such a significant need there. But he's been good enough, at least preseason, back in the spring and then preseason camp, once he started getting some time at wideout. If that's any indication, he's on track to, help this team this season.
Yeah, and I tend to think he's going to get some snaps here or there at quarterback as well. That's just my opinion. I think there's a lot you can do with him there, just to keep teams honestly. So I think you try to do everything you can there to sort of mix things up and get him on the field. By the way, again, if you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube, appreciate you joining us. Let's do what we do every time. If you're on YouTube, go ahead all together now. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the little bell so you'll get notified every time. If we all do this together, our numbers will keep going up. If you're on Facebook, hit the like button, share it. Just help us spread the word. These are completely free. So really appreciate everybody joining us, though. We've seen our numbers continue to climb, and I want to continue to see that happen. There's been some talk, and I think we can tie, again, some of the questions and comments I've seen come across to something I want to talk about anyway. There was one question. I think that was Miss Lynn, who is one of our Gamecock Central subscribers, asked about the position group that's maybe the biggest concern. And then there's been some questions about Dakereon Joyner. There's been some questions about wide receiver. So I will tie all those things together because I think that remains the case for me, Chris, is that wide receiver is the spot you have to have the most, I think, concern with. So let's talk about Muschamp today. I think it's been interesting to hear the staff from a sort of big picture standpoint, Chris, continue to talk about wanting more from that position, while at the same time talk about seeing some big plays from that position, which to me probably leads us back to the word consistency. And coaches, we as media or fans or just fans of the game, Chris, we all look at big plays, right? Like we look at that guy made the big leaping catch. That guy, he made the sack. At cornerback, that dude made the big interception. But coaches, they want the dude that play after play, down after down, they can trust to do their job, right? Like that's the difference from watching a game from, I think, an outside perspective and probably being on the sideline watching a game as the person who knows exactly what every single individual of the 11 on the field are supposed to do every single play, right? So to me, you add in everything we've heard, everything the coaches are saying, sort of the fact, well, they're talking up the receivers, but they say they want more out of the receivers. I think it goes back to that word consistency. I think there's some players there. There's some dudes that can help. He praised Shi Smith for sort of coming into his own as a – Shi's never going to be a rah-rah guy, but has come into his own as more of a leader in the receiver room. You want to see that from your senior. Jalen Brooks continues to do some good things. If you're just joining us, Jalen Brooks has not hurt. They don't have an answer yet on his NCAA waiver. They're still – Muschamp said they may even still be putting that together. But – you hear some Rico Powers, Xavier Legette, Dakereon Joyner. Josh Vann had a good day yesterday, which is a good sign. So I think, when we talked about receivers enough as is, but just adding what Muschamp said today, Chris, I think it does go back to the idea of they're seeing some good things, but they want to see it on a more consistent basis.
It's red zone play or just catching the ball more consistently. There was one day after practice where he talked about drops. Those are the things that you can't have. They've got some guys, and this goes back, we made this point a lot. They've got some guys that are more talented than what has shown, whether it's been injuries or they were inexperienced. You take Xavier Legette, probably one of the faster guys on the team, physically pretty imposing, really talented. Last year, he was raw. He was learning to play receiver for the first time. He played quarterback in high school just because he was the best player on the field on his team. And so there were some things where he would show flashes in practice of making, a one-handed grab over Israel Muschamp in practice that ended up on social media, stuff like that. But, it's just, do you catch the ball consistently? Do you make all the plays? Do you block? Do you do the little things? And so, even coming into this year, we heard a lot about Shi Smith, even as a senior, needing to be more consistent. And so maybe throughout preseason, you're doing that. Maybe Josh Vann, can he turn the corner and take that next step and become more consistent? Can they get this room totally healthy and keep him healthy? Can you get more out of Ortre Smith, sort of going back to his freshman year where he caught 30 balls? Maybe so. And so that'd be huge. But the key for them is, explosive plays, they need more of them. We know that. But they need just more consistency. We talked about this baseline earlier of cart before the horse, make sure you're operating within your offense, getting plays in, things like that. Same thing at receiver in the skill positions. Make sure you know where to be, what to do. Make sure you're doing the small things, blocking, catching every pass that you possibly can. And then you got to go win some one-on-ones. And so I suppose it's encouraging that they have – Muschamp said it today. He said, we've had more explosives this preseason than probably we've had. And that was sort of eye-opening for me too. And he really attributed it to Mike Bobo and then some of the receivers making plays and some of the quarterbacks hitting deep balls. But as well, They just got to make sure they're consistent there. It's good news that they've shown the capacity to do it, but they got to be consistent doing it because competition is going to be very tough this season.
Yeah, so, all right, I want to run through a few more notes I made while watching. We've hit on most of them already, and the questions have sort of, like, matched up, I would say. He did talk a bit about punt return. Now, T-Rob sort of basically let it be known they want for, J.C. Horn to take that job. Muschamp made it seem a little bit more, I would say, open. He mentioned J.C., Jamie Robinson, Shi Smith, I think. Kick return is wide open. He mentioned Leggett as someone to watch. Shi Smith, again, to carry on Joyner. I think I may have missed a guy or so when I was writing it down as he was talking. But, special teams, obviously Parker White's going to be the kicker. The returner battles, I think those are something that they'll start to get a feel for when you start scrimmaging as well. So that's another thing for Saturday. And something we had talked about offline here, Chris, was the punter spot. And I knew when he started talking about Kai Kroger, and literally as he was saying the sentence, he was like, yeah, Kai Kroger has done some good things, or Kai Kroger has shown some explosiveness in his leg. I was just waiting. Literally, I was like, all right, here comes the but. And it's going to be but. He needs to be more consistent, right? Yeah. I was just waiting on it. And sure enough, so that's the case. From what I was told, I had a high school special teams coach who had seen Kai Kroger punt in person. That was like, dude, this guy has a freaking missile of a leg. So people maybe forget when Joe got here, when Joe Charlton got here, there was talk within the program of whether or not he would ever be the starting punter. And now he's competing in the NFL. And it was because he was able to – it's a repeatable thing. It's a repeatable motion. It's muscle memory. The fact that he has Kai Kroger would not be a first-year player taking up a scholarship at the punter position, right, if he wasn't incredibly talented at that position. Now, is there probably going to be a little drop-off at first from a veteran senior who is one of the best in the country at what he does? Absolutely. But I do think to replace Charlton with someone as talented as Kroger is a pretty good look for South Carolina.
Yeah, for sure. You're exactly right, man. If you didn't make that point about Joe, I was going to make it, and I watched Joe in high school. And I think he kicked field goals and everything too. And I remember being at an AC Florida game one night, and he just absolutely hammered. I can't remember if it's a field goal or an extra point, but he kicked it it was unnecessarily far and hard on a field goal to where it went over the field house that was way behind the goalpost. I mean, just huge leg, big physically imposing kid with his big leg. But you're right, he had to get more consistent. And throughout his career, he did that. He developed. And now he's in the NFL. So one of the best in the country last year. I mean, he outdueled Braden Mann, who was considered the best in the country from A&M last year. So same thing with Kroger, man. I think there's going to be, no matter which freshman South Carolina brought in, you can't expect the same. What this kid does have is a lot of upside. He's got, he's a lefty, so that's sort of interesting. And definitely has a big leg and was really highly regarded out of high school. But for him, it'll just be about doing it live action. Muschamp said that on Saturday during the scrimmage, you're going to put some pressure on him, put him in some situations to see how he responds. But he's going to have every opportunity, I think, to go win that job and has a chance to be really good in the future.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about a couple of other guys defensively that I've heard some good things about, and I'm hoping to have, for those of you who are on GamecockCentral.com, if you're not, you can see right at the bottom of your screen, use the code GameCocks to get 50% off your first year of Gamecock Central. That goes to full price after year one, but you can get on for a really good deal there right now. And, Chris, I'll lose my train of thought very easily, guys. Point being, what I was about to say is I'm hoping to have some more team notes for everybody tomorrow in a Carolina Confidential on our message board. But a little sneak preview, and we had somebody asking about some defensive standouts. I've heard, no surprise here, but that J.C. Horn has just taken his game, Chris, to that next level. I think we all expected that, but sometimes guys are late bloomers. Sometimes they come in, they play early. Sometimes guys come in and play early, but are already so developed that they just sort of are what they are, right? And they're kind of a similar player as a senior or a junior as they are as a freshman. I don't think J.C. Horn is one of those guys. Point being, J.C. has really just had a natural progression because he does work extremely hard and is extremely talented. And I've heard he's been absolutely shut down at corner this camp so far, which I think is a great sign. And someone that I've heard some buzz about personally that then you heard Jamie Robinson vouch for today, which, by the way, Jamie Robinson's got to be one of your favorite interviews on this team, man. The way Chris, do you remember watching Jamie Robinson at Carolina's camp? He was playing corner at the time. Was he a junior, a sophomore? He was young.
Yeah, he was young.
And we were being like, man, that guy's going to be one of the best corners in the country. And we didn't know if Carolina would have any shot to actually land him. But he just epitomizes what you want in a DB. So Jamie Robinson is going to have a great year, outstanding sophomore year. But when Jamie Robinson vouches for a guy, that stands out to me. And he vouched for Darius Rush, who, is someone I've heard has started to get comfortable, someone that has started to make some plays. Jamie said he probably has the most interceptions. We saw that in some of the stuff that USC put out. And, arguably had, I think, one of his better practices, since he's been at South Carolina here recently. And I think we saw him come in, play receiver. Then he was playing some safety in the spring, had moved to corner last year, then moved to safety. Now is back at corner. I think he's starting to settle into that spot, which speaks to the depth. I think we're starting to see some real depth at that cornerback spot. When you throw in Cam Smith, Johnny Dixon, it was obvious, Chris, listening to Muschamp talk about Cam and Johnny as well, that, are there stuff they still want them to work on? Yes, obviously, they're still young players. But I just got the feeling listening to Muschamp talk about those two guys that they're guys he thinks can actually help, a lot this year and can play well and can cover guys. So those three kids at cornerback, I think, should have Carolina fans feeling really pretty good about that position.
I'm really happy on the Darius Rush thing for a couple reasons. Number one, he's a really good kid, so I'm really glad that he's sort of ascending and sort of making a move and having his best, days ahead of him and his best days currently. But also, when I saw him in high school, this, I really liked the idea of him as a DB. He showed a lot of things at receiver, but I just thought with his length and his athleticism and his range, I really like specifically at safety, which he has tried some at Carolina, but I really like the thought of him as a DB. Wes has even joked that I want to turn everybody into a DB. I don't want anybody to play receiver at all, which I may be guilty of. But I really like Darius as a DB, and so I'm glad that he's doing well for him personally. But also interested to see how much of a role he could play. Can he get on the field some? Can he push? Everybody talks about Cam Smith and Johnny Dixon for good reason. We came into this preseason knowing that if or when Muschamp either switched to safety or just played safety in certain packages, just one of those guys need to be on the field. If so, which one? Well, maybe Darius is working his way into that conversation a little bit too. But I think the challenge that Muschamp mentioned, and he specifically was talking about Johnny Dixon and Cam Smith when he said this, was tackling on the edge. He mentioned the condensed formations where, teams will bring receivers closer to the line, run the football on you. It's real important to be able to set the edge and go make a tackle. That's maybe an area where they're not quite as strong right now. So that's something they got to work on. It's something that, a lot of young corners have to work on. Those guys are all still young, obviously. And so it'll be interesting to continue tracking their progression. But Carolina does feel better about its options in the secondary. Again, they've had Muschamp admitted it and talked about it today at safety. They got to be better there. One big key is, can they stay healthy there? You know, when you look at a guy like Jalen Dickerson, who hasn't stayed healthy, he's good right now. So that's a key area for them. But certainly having some other corners that can play too and that you feel good about, that'll also help.
Yeah, and so one other thing, Chris, with Muschamp today that I think maybe got it would be easy to gloss over, but I think caught my attention was when he was asked about Jamar Brown. And Jamar Brown has gotten, and I think when Muschamp said he's moved to safety, you know, we didn't really know what that quite meant yet. Like, is he? We knew he was still playing some dime linebacker, but you know, how much is he working at true like safety? How much is he at that dime spot? Sort of how exactly are they going to use him? Well, I remember this was maybe 2-3 years ago. I specifically remember us interviewing Shirai Green, and he was talking about how he was playing the Will dime, basically, in this defense. And, you know, I've thought of this defense that you basically have the Mike, the Will, and the Sam. Then you have the nickel when that's on the field. Then traditionally, a dime means that's like that additional. So a nickel formation, you have 5 defensive backs. A dime formation, you have 6 defensive backs, and you bring that 6th guy onto the field. Well, so he's playing the dime backer spot, which I think in this case, in this scheme, is the 6th defensive back, quote, quote, on the field. Well, so which that makes me think maybe at times we haven't even, depending on who was playing it, maybe we didn't even realize Carolina was in a dime if the guy playing the dime was someone else that was also playing linebacker, if this is making any sense. So point being, Jamar Brown hasn't really been talked about a lot as the safe when Muschamp talks about safeties. But then he said, hey, when we got that dime backer on the field, that's been maybe our best look. You know, so that makes me think Jamar Brown, which I think in this case it would be Jamar Brown and then Ernest Jones. Once he's back, he'll be back. Muschamp said September 7th. Once he's back out there, we should have maybe led off with that injury report. But maybe it's sort of I don't know if I necessarily looked at Jamar Brown's role or knew exactly what Muschamp meant when he first talked about it. But now I'm thinking that he could be on the field a lot, but if you just looked at it without hearing any of that, it's going to look more like he's still playing linebacker maybe.
Yeah, and the defense is so multiple, man, that you're right. They're going to deploy some different formations, and I think they may have even more flexibility this year, assuming they can stay healthy to do that. You know, Sky Moore played that dime linebacker position at times within this defense, and some people may remember, like if you ever saw one of the formations that South Carolina ran, I can't remember any in-game situations like a specific play, but sometimes you would see Sky Moore line up and close to the snap or on the snap, he would literally retreat all the way back like he was a free safety. I think that was a dime, type formation. And maybe, that may have been one of the ways for the staff to sort of disguise, what he's playing. We know that at the buck, sometimes they'll deploy the buck is what they call a spinner, somebody who can rush the passer, drop into coverage, do a lot of different things. And so they just sort of disguise that look sometimes. But, yeah, the dime is one that Jamar Brown, I think, fits quite well because from what we knew about him in high school and sort of the limited sample size in college, he's not a huge guy. He's pretty rocked up for his size, but he's not going to be, a 240-pound, 6'4" linebacker. But he, can run. He's really good in coverage. That was his strength, and he's pretty instinctual in terms of getting to the ball, finding it, driving on the ball, and maybe a little bit more physical than people give him credit for with his size. So it seems like a good fit for him. And so from what Muschamp said, it seems like he's sort of growing into that role a little bit, but they seem to feel good about what they've got there with him.
Yeah, so multiple, I think is the word probably to describe this defense. And, even Jamie Robinson talking about the nickel spot when he said J.C. Horn, has still worked in there, which we know he did that a bunch as a freshman. Johnny Dixon working in there. I think it almost seems like in some looks, Chris, that nickel spot could take on much more of being a true like cornerback, where you're putting someone there who could potentially lock down a really good quick slot receiver. And I think having Johnny Dixon come on, having Cam Smith, having Darius Rush, having all these guys come on at cornerback just gives you that ability to do that. Gives you the ability to play Izzy some at safety if that's what you need to do. I think it's very clear that in base package, in regular package, that in the secondary, I think it seems more and more clear that it's probably going to be Izzy and JC at corner, and then RJ and Jamie at safety, I think, personally. Could it change? Yeah, but I think that's what they're looking at. Now, once they go to nickel, I think there's all types of different ways they could do it. Sliding Jamie down and, moving Izzy up to safety. Who comes onto the field at that point? Do you leave Jamie at safety and just, if you feel really good about Johnny Dixon at nickel or even sliding JC over to nickel and pulling Cam Smith up or Johnny, whoever. There's so many different ways that they could do this that, frankly, it's, impossible to project, for one thing, and probably will change as the year progresses, as they see how guys perform on the field. Chris, and frankly, depending on matchups as well. There's going to be certain teams where you may match up one way and certain other teams where it makes more sense to go the other. I always sort of watched the defensive personnel last year. That's something that I enjoy focusing on for whatever reason. And there were times when, even with the same personnel on the field, sometimes R.J. Roderick would be playing nickel, and sometimes you look and, Jamie's playing nickel. I think Jamie was primarily the main nickel back and played very, very well at that spot. But it was multiple guys. At times, I think they slid JC back over there as well. So there's a lot that they're going to be able to do with the sort of way they structure this secondary.
Yeah, and Israel Muschamp, I think, could certainly factor into that safety equation. He can play either. That was one of the biggest questions I had coming into the preseason was, would Izzy make that move to safety on like a permanent basis? We know he's played it some in in-game situations, and we know he could play it like out of need or just out of situation. But, would he play it permanently? And it looks like the answer is not permanently. Like right now, it looks like you've got him at corner, and from my understanding, having a good preseason alongside J.C. Horn, playing well at corner. Those two look pretty stable there. And then at safety, that's another thing. The other part of it is not only do you feel good about if you were to move Muschamp to safety, not only do you need to feel good about some other corners, but how do you feel about safety? If you feel okay about safety, if you feel like that's stabilized, then you feel even better about leaving Israel Muschamp at corner. And so, it seems like they feel a little better about it. It's still a prove-it position, but with Jamie, with RJ, who, I still think they want RJ Roderick to be, more consistent there, as with everybody. But you got those two, and then you got Jalen Dickerson, who we know would be playing an even bigger role had he been healthy for the duration of his career. And you got Shiloh Sanders there too, and maybe another guy here or there. But Muschamp can play there situationally. We may still see that, but it seems like we have maybe a little bit more clarity positionally at corner and safety. I think the bigger question may be, like you said, how do they deploy guys in nickel packages or dime or those types of things?
Yeah, and so all those things should be fun to see how they play out. And I'm just glad we have all these football details to talk about and go over and sort of guess on in some cases and deliver news on in others. So, and I'm excited. Muschamp, for those of you who follow every last thing that comes out on the team, Muschamp will actually talk again on Saturday after the scrimmage, which will be, I think, a big day. And, I think the quarterback, getting back to what we talked about at the very beginning, the quarterback battle will start to really shape itself out, and we're going to have a good feel for that position. But also worth mentioning, Chris, that Muschamp said it's fluid because I think they know they're going to need both those guys. Muschamp has talked all off season about it's all hands on deck. You never know when somebody could have kind of an exposure to COVID and be taken out just by the rules, just by the quarantine rules. So, I think that's something that will always be a part of the conversation as they look to build a depth chart. It's a little bit different than any other year. You see the kind words coming up there from Miss Lynn. Appreciate that. Miss Lynn has been on Gamecock Central, I think, for a long time, and one of our big posters who comes out to our Gamecock Central tailgates as well, and has a good time. And appreciate the kind words. If anybody else wants to get on, just use Gamecocks as your promo code to get 50% off your first year there for new subscribers. And I know we had a bunch of questions we didn't get to, but we archived these. So if you're joining late, go back and check it out. And I did want to hit one question because we were talking about linebackers. Rosendo Lewis, Chris, it does seem like he has been, he's dealt with injuries. He's been one of those guys that just has not been able to consistently get healthy. But Rosendo has sort of been a bit of the forgotten man, I think, as far as discussions at the linebacker position.
Yeah, he has been. I mean, he's dealt with injuries, and he's still out until September, right? I mean, he's Chad Terrell's been rehabbing the ACL, and Rosendo Lewis had the quad injury in the spring. So if I'm not mistaken, I don't think he's even been cleared yet, right? So, so I think he's out there and has remained injured for quite a while, and he's just got to get healthy. That's the biggest thing for him: health and becoming a little bit more becoming more consistent. When he is on the field. And right now, South Carolina without Ernest Jones, who's supposed to be back around. I think Muschamp said September 7th. So. Just trying to continue developing some guys, even Sherrod Green, who's an older veteran guy, just being more consistent for him, is a key for them.
Yeah, Rosendo was the one that had the torn tendon in his quad, which you hate for him, man, because I'm trying to go back and look here on the fly. He did some good things in the spring early on. And had actually, I think, gathered the attention of the staff and of his teammates. So who knows, man? Because you know what? It's all coming back to me. He had a great offseason prior to the spring and had really slimmed down, gotten quicker, gotten faster. And I think he put himself in a position to get into that rotation and then had another injury. So certainly hope for him that he can get healthy and be ready to roll there. All right, so I think that's about it for today. Chris, you got any final thoughts? I think we broke down the presser and hit on most of everything Muschamp had to say. So what you think, man? Did we hit it all?
Yeah, I think we about hit it all. So be really obviously we've got some time between now and then, but Saturday scrimmage I think going to be really big for this team in some small areas, maybe even in some bigger areas. So appreciate everybody watching. We'll have complete coverage of the preseason at GamecockCentral.com. Take advantage, if you haven't already, 60-day free trial with our promo code that we got going there, or the promo code Gamecocks, get 50% off your first year annual subscription. We feel like you'll want to stick around, and we can do this every day. We appreciate it.
Yep. Curse Sticks, Shane, Miss Lynn, Trip, Jarrett, Roderick, believes 57 WPW. He's a Gamecock Central subscriber. Miss Sandage, let's see, Brian, Roderick, a bunch of people on. My boy Rob, Hugh. Appreciate all of you joining us. And for Chris, I'm Wes, and we'll talk to you next time.